Welcome. My name's Phil Stock. I'm the CEO and founder of Envision 360. We're hosting the webinar today. This is our second in our series of webinars. We had a hugely successful webinar very recently, and we're aiming to put these on throughout the year. So welcome. You'll see today's focus is about a collaborative QA approach in SEND, looking at multidisciplinary QA. We're really fortunate to have three fantastic speakers today who have all worked in local authorities, have extensive experience within children's services in the SEND world. I'll introduce them in due course. A little bit of housekeeping. So there's two functions today that we might utilize. You'll see chat, which is a typical Teams function, and then Q&A. So it should be at the top of your screen with a little question mark. I'm just going to hit it on mine now. If you have a click in there, there's one comment where I've said a practice. Could you just put a thumbs up on that so we know people can access that? During the course of the three presentations, we've identified and ring-fenced three 15-minute slots for the presentations. You'll be able to ask questions in that Q&A channel as the presenters are speaking. They won't be seeing the Q&A channel, so I'll sort of facilitate and manage that. And when we come to the end of their presentation, we will put some of the questions to them. If you like a question that pops in, or that's a question that you think is quite pertinent to yourselves, do give it a thumbs up, because that way we can start to prioritize the questions. Those with the most thumbs up are the ones we'll position first to our speakers today. So I've got one comment there to say we can access the chat, but not the Q&A. So someone behind the scenes will be looking at that now and hopefully get that resolved. I can see a number so far. We've got around so far just north of 60 people I think have joined, and 20 have hit the thumbs up on the Q&A. So, but we do have the chat function as well. So if for whatever reason you can't access the Q&A, do just pop something in the chat and I'll make sure I'll pick that up. Okay, next bit of housekeeping. Today's slides will be shared. So everything that you see on screen today will be shared with you. So all of that will come to you, along with a recording of today's webinar. So today's webinar is being recorded. So you'll get following today's session, you'll get a link to the recording. You'll get a copy of the slides. And at the end of the session, we've ring-fenced a bit of time for a very quick survey, really for you guys to talk about what engaged you today, but also to help us plan future webinars. So we're shaping them for what the community wants and what the appetite is for. We'll also share a summary of that feedback with you. So you'll get all of those three things from attending today. Okay, right, moving on swiftly to the agenda. So like I say, I'm introing the session and we, Envision 360, are hosting it, but this isn't about Envision 360. It might come up in some of the conversations and deliveries and sessions, but this is a knowledge sharing exercise where these webinars are for the community, particularly education, SEND, children's services, to hear from like-minded professionals, hear about practice that's going on elsewhere, ideas and so forth. That's solely our purpose, that people leave today with a little bit more awareness of what's going on than they did prior to starting today's session. We've got three sessions, three brief, snappy sessions. So we've got, I'll introduce each individual as they come through, but we've got Sam, Chris and Joanne today, who will all be delivering an individual session. And then we'll just have a very brief close and a survey. So without further ado, oh, there's a nice quote. Apologies, Lydia. Thank you for putting that one in. This is essentially just trying to echo the point I made around sharing knowledge. These are learned experiences, workshops, sessions, webinars. So we really do hope you will get something out of it. I should say the feedback from the last webinar was overwhelmingly positive. People had lots of takeaways. We had different local authorities. We had a parent carer lead. There was lots of really insightful information and the feedback was great. So hoping for a similar one today. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sam Scullion. Sam works in Merton. She's very experienced in the world of SEND as a SEND manager, has also been leading on some of the transformative work in the London Borough of Merton, and is going to talk a little bit today about QA, multidisciplinary QA and moderation. So without further ado, Sam, welcome. Are you
I
there?
feel, yeah, I am. Thank you very much. Just sorting out my camera and my sound. Okay, hello everybody. As Phil said, I'm Sam Scully and I work in Merton. And I'm heading up transformation in Merton. We're a safety valve authority. So my post was created on the back of a safety valve to kind of look at some of our processes, procedures, our quality assurance, and a lot of our data coming out to try and improve our outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay, so Merton's journey to QA. We've been using Envision 360 for about 18 months now. We started off very slowly using it, trying to get everybody used to the system and how to QA and seeing what was coming out of the back end. What we did discover when we were QAing and benchmarking on some of the reports that you can pull down on Envision 360, that our results were a lot better than other local authorities. So that begs the question, either we're really, really good or we were marking too high. And I think the latter was probably actually the truthful one. So we really started to look at how we QA and start some challenge with each other. So we've embedded the system in-house now. So within the SEN team, we have 7 managers that moderate a plan every month. And then we moderate that plan afterwards, and I'll show you some of how we do that as we go through. Next slide, please. Okay, so how the EHCP is selected for moderation, we don't use any formula at all. Generally, what we do is we go back on the EHCPs that have been finalised from annual review the month before. So if we're in March now, we'll look at all those that have been finalised in April, and then we'll just select from them. We do concentrated moderation, so we might do child looked after 1 month, child protection. We've looked at different teams as well, so sometimes we select maybe the secondary team. Sorry, I should say in Merton we have 4 teams. We have an assessment team that do all the referrals through to EHCP. We have a primary team, a secondary team, and a post-16 team. So we kind of concentrate our focus in that way. Other than that, there's no real selection. We like to just to pick one. The time frame for the moderation for those in-house is a month. They have a month, so we get them out as early in the month as we can, and they have the month to QA and moderate, and then we have a meeting all together and kind of challenge some of our thinking on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we started doing is in Envision 360, when you moderate, you can get the scores of every person and how those moderators have scored up, you know, from good down to outstanding down to inadequate. And we started doing that, and that was fine. But what we weren't getting through was some of those comments, because I really encouraged the moderators to put comments against each of their scores so we could understand how they were scoring those plans and what they, you know, why they felt they arrived at that score. And some of the learning opportunities coming out of that, we weren't kind of recording them and grasping them enough and sort of triangulating some of that work. And the willingness to learn from others was about our challenging each other internally, and that was yeah, that was an experience to start off with. But I think now we've got there, some people got a little upset at first and kind of defending their scores, but now it's much better, and we learn from each other on different things. As we know, every plan is different, every case is different, so we're learning all the time. Next slide, please.
I'll just share your spreadsheet.
Oh yeah,
now,
yeah, that's fine.
moment.
Yeah. So one thing that we recognised when we were looking at our moderation is we couldn't on Envision 360 draw down any of the comments against the scores. So I devised a spreadsheet for that, and this is what we use every month. And I just wanted to show it to you, just as an example. You know, you may choose to use something similar or not, but it works for us. So I'll just show it for you. If you could put that up, please, Lydia.
Sorry, one moment. I'm just trying to get it to show. Here we go. One moment. Sorry.
It's okay.
It won't let me show it. One moment.
Sam, do you want to sort of talk to the spreadsheet, even though it's not
Yeah,
there?
There we
yeah.
go. We're in. We see?
Yes, we can, and it's very small. So, but that's
Brilliant.
okay. Okay, so this is just an example of the spreadsheet we use. So for this example, I've kind of cut it down to just show you 4 moderators. We generally have about 7. And then what I've done is every section of the EHCP, and then what we do is we mark that per moderator, but underneath the most important valuable bit is the comments that we put as how they arrived at that that decision or that outcome, but also what they felt about that. And when we started this, our scores were really different. And like I say, that was a bit challenging, but we got through that. Now you'll see moderator 2, and although this is very anonymous, I will tell you that moderator number 2 is our tribunals manager, who always scores very low. And you can see his scores compared to us, but we have those kind of practice versus law kind of questions, you know, that come out of this. So like I say, every section we go through, and then we'll come out with an overall outcome of the plan. But the really important, crucial bit for me is how do we kind of triangulate this back? So on the right hand side, we have an action column there, and under every section we come to a common agreement on what the action for that should be. You might not be able to see this because it's very small, but for instance, under section A there, we felt that was a really good example of section A. So we take that back to the EHC coordinator team meeting, and we'll show them that as an example of a really good one. Some things lead into the managers meeting, some things go above and they go to the director leadership team. Where we need, you know, or we want to show them something or an example of something. It could be training into social care, training to health. So this is all the kind of stuff that we triangulate and learn from these examples. What I will say is, if we mark the EHCP as inadequate overall score, we call an interim review and we have a look at that, and we'll rewrite that plan alongside the parents and the school. This one was, but we decided that we wouldn't do that in this case because it was a phase transfer that was coming up very soon anyway. So it would have gone through that process anyway. But as you can see, every section there is covered. Some of the comments can be quite long, but we really kind of get a common understanding of everyone's thinking and how they came to that. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you, and it's something you may choose to use, you may not. I was asking Phil that would it be something that they could use in the future that would be available to all users. Maybe it could be downloadable, something, you know, like this, but it works for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
It's okay.
Do feel free now to pop any questions in the chat. Thanks for a really brief overview, but really good insight into how moderation can look within a local authority from a multidisciplinary. You can see you guys have put a lot of thought, putting templates together and a really clear framework. One of the questions that's come through, Sam, is how many plans do you tend to order each month, and how many do you look to moderate?
Okay, so at the moment, in regards to the moderation, we just moderate 1 plan a month through this, and that's really just getting those 7 moderators together and a time factor. We'd obviously like to increase that. We did increase it this month to 2, but we would look to increase that more. QAing every month, though, each manager will QA 10 plans each month, and then we kind of bring that together as well.
Thanks, Sam. Like I say, we will be sharing slides and recordings, so all of that will come to you. But a fantastic kickoff. Thank you, Sam, for that.
Okay.
We're going to move on.
Question.
Oh, sorry, I'm not checking the chat. I was looking in the Q&A. Forgive me. Oh,
It's just in the Q&A, it's come through.
I'm just slightly behind. Apologies. Do colleagues from health and social care also contribute to the Q&A process, Sam?
Yes, they do. They do. So we have them as a moderator as well, and they feed into it. So it's multidisciplinary.
And the sort of follow-up question to that is, how do you find getting other services outside of SEND stroke education to contribute audits and be part of that process? Is that a difficult process? How does it work in Merton?
Yeah, it has been quite a difficult process to get people to sign up and to take the time to do that. So I'll be very truthful, it hasn't been easy. But we have got there. We've got a new exec director, and she's put quite a bit of pressure on the other services to get involved. So we're lucky enough that we have got them on board now.
Fantastic. And then from one of our health colleagues, they've asked, who are the moderators? Who completes the moderation component on it? You mentioned a tribunal lead, health and social care airport. Is there anyone else? Any other services, professionals?
SEND managers do as well. Tribunal manager. We have a teacher that's employed as our ARP lead, or you might have bases. But additionally, resource provision, she moderates as well. We have our health commissioner who does as well, and we have manager of social care, children's social care.
Thanks, Sam.
Is also a moderator.
And a couple more questions. One question comes through, and I might be able to comment on this one as well, around the gradings, the traditional stroke historic Ofsted gradings, and how comfortable people are using those. I know you're probably lent through the tool, and Vision 360 HP tool currently has those. Hot off the press, and with our focus groups and steering groups, there's been lots of exploration, and there will be a move away from those labels, those grading boundaries. Information's forthcoming on that in the very near future. But the question was, how comfortable are you using those?
Yeah, so as comfortable as we can be, and we're guided with the tool that we use for those. I think the biggest hurdle for us was when we first started, of where it sits in between good and outstanding, and coming to that judgment of what outstanding looks like, what good looks like. So there was some learning to do around that, and you only really get that from talking to others. So our SEM managers very much will go with what the plan is in front of them, whereas what we were finding was our health colleagues and social care colleagues were going with the advice. They were kind of looking, although they didn't see the advice, they were looking at that side. Whereas as a SEM manager, you know that your plan is written on the advice that you're given. So if your advice is not good quality, it's going to be very difficult to get a good quality plan. So that's some of those actions, and that learning that comes back is that pushback to other professionals about the quality of the advice coming through.
Thanks, Sam. And yeah, absolutely being led by the tool, I can understand that. But like I say, that there will be a shift away from that. And then the next question is, do you use Envision 360 to moderate and then pull the information from Envision 360 to the spreadsheet to look at specific themes and topics?
Yeah, absolutely. So that spreadsheet that you saw, all that information there comes from the moderation of the plan, and it's very manually done at the moment. So I'm pulling out those comments against each moderator to kind of pull that together. It is a manual exercise, so we would look in the future whether it's something that if enough users want it, whether Phil, you would look at that as being a tool that sits within Envision 360. It'd be great if everybody had access to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had this conversation off air, as it were, but yeah, absolutely, we're exploring the evolution of the EHCP tool. We've got 60 local authorities utilizing it, so examples like this and being able to share today is fantastic, because we can see what potentially could be done with moderation, with a few more features or capabilities, stroke functions in the tool. So thanks, Sam.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That was fantastic. You can see lots of engagement there, lots of questions. We're going to move on now to Chris. So we're delighted to introduce Chris Munday, a hugely experienced Director of Children's Services, has a very big reputation in the sector, was National Chair of the ADCS, National directors of children's services, and also has had a lead role within the London Change Partnership Programme with regards to SEND and the evolution of what's happening in the SEND sector. So, Chris, I'm going to hand over to you.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Phil. Great to be here and great to speak with you all today. So I'm not really going to talk much about Envision 360. In fact, I don't reference it that much at all. But I'm going to talk about quality assurance and SEND and what might be effective strategies for building strong QA, but making sure that you've got all of the foundations and that there's good levels of participation. It's interesting hearing from Sam and how they're doing some elements of that in Merton. I'm going to talk slightly broader than just on audit. Audit is useful, but it's part of an overall QA framework. So what we'll try and do today is I talk to you about what's important for leaders about quality assurance. What information do you need? How do you ensure your quality assurance framework is looking at the right things? How can you move from sort of compliance to best practice? How can you involve the key stakeholders in the practice of quality assurance? We talked a little bit about that in Sam's presentation. And how do you highlight the positives and negatives from your quality assurance when, you know, there's quite a challenging environment, if you want to say anything good, in the SEND space at the moment. So those are the sort of things that I'm going to talk about. There's a couple of interactive parts of the presentation as well, so please do join in with those when they come up using Mentimeter. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So why does it matter? Why does quality assurance matter to leaders? One of the things that, as a director of children's services, I was always acutely aware of is that I am accountable. And as a leader, I am accountable for the quality of practice within my area. In fact, it's defined in my statutory guidance that I had to follow as a director, that, you know, I was professionally accountable. So if you're professionally accountable, you need to have a really strong sense of what's going on in your system. And so you need to understand whether your system's working well or whether it's working badly, what bits are working well, what bits could do with improvement. It's also really important because it gives you an understanding of any pressures or failures in the system. So, you know, if you're getting consistently poor advice from one of the partners that you're working with, if you've got a good QA process, or if people are telling you things, you can then intervene and try and seek support and help in that space. It gives you that opportunity to challenge the system. So, you know, if you're looking at timeliness of EHCPs, you can say, okay, why is it that these EHCPs aren't on time? What are the systems that are working? What are the systems that aren't working? And how do you challenge? And who do you challenge? Is it that the advice is coming in too late? Is it that you don't have enough SEN staff? Looking at all of those things, that's what quality assurance enables you to do. For me, it's really important that it's about a focus for improvement. Yes, it's about identifying the systems issues, but if you're just identifying the systems issues and you're not looking at improvement for children and young people within the process, then it's a bit of an unhelpful tool. It's got to help practitioners know what needs to be better. It needs to help you know what needs to be better. It needs to help you improve your system as an overall approach. And it should be used as this system for driving continuous improvement. It's not that you do a bit of QA and a bit of improvement. It's got to be built into the sort of way that you operate, the way that you work. It's how we do things here. So using it as a really positive tool, and not one that is there to blame people or to say you're not doing things well. It's a tool that's there to enable you to drive positive change and in this case for children and young people. If we could move on, please, Lydia. So I was sort of thinking about how would I describe how are you looking at the right things? And for me, there are sort of 4 really key elements that I think are important. There's probably lots more, but I think that there are 4 things that would help me understand. And all of those are about focusing around the child, which is why the child is central in this model. So you have audit, and that's a really important part of your QA process, what's going on the files. But we need to remember that audit looks backwards. It doesn't look forward. So, you're looking back at what's been done. You need to look at performance data and what's going on in your system in relation to performance. You need to look at your data around outcomes, and we'll talk a bit about outcomes in a minute. But, how are your children's outcomes in your system? So, what's happening in terms of their education progress and achievement and attainment. And finally, you've got to have this section around voice. How are you hearing what children, parents, professionals are saying about the systems that they're working in? And it's when you've got those 4 elements of quality assurance in place that you can give yourself a sense. It gives you much more of a sense that you know what's going on in your place. One of those things wouldn't drive improvement. All 4 of those things together do drive improvement. So if I give an example in the children's social care field, you could look at data that says every the performance data is saying that all of your assessments are on time. That tells you that they're on time, that people are ticking the boxes, they're telling you they're on time. It's really good, they're all on time. Only when you overlay that with your audit data that actually says all of them are of really poor quality, and actually some of them don't actually have anything written, somebody's just ticked a box that says an assessment's been undertaken. You can't collaborate whether that performance is good until you've got that audit information. You can't collaborate that that's good until you know that children and young people are saying that the quality of their assessments were good. And that should then lead to you being able to look at the outcomes and saying, are they good as well? So until you've got that whole system approach to QA, I think you're really struggling. If we could move on to the next one. So I was just going to say something very briefly about other areas, because one of the things was that I was asked to do was to look at the whole system. And I do think that there are some things that are important from social work. There are things that are interested in the way that health look at things. So there's a whole range of really interesting QA approaches. I think what I would say is really strong in social work, and certainly in high performing authorities, is how their social work audit practice links with data, but also creates these learning loops where you're doing appreciative inquiry as an approach, where you're looking at the positives of practice as well as what's on the file, and you're saying it could be better if, so that you're bringing in this ability to learn as part of this continuous improvement loop. And I think that that is a real strength in the social work system, which I don't think has quite got there yet in education. And I think some of that is about the number of plans that are being produced and the nature of the relationship. But I do think the learning loops about making sure it's better the next time you complete a plan, I think is really important. The other thing for me that I think is helpful is the role of parents and young people in quality assurance. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, but I'm really clear that parents and children should be part of your audit system. They should at least be asked their experiences, but actually if you've got them as auditors, in your monitoring. That's really powerful, and certainly that was an approach that we took in my time in Barnet as the DCS there, and it was well regarded by parents in that space. If we could move on, please, Lydia. So what do I mean by migrating from a compliance-based system to one that's best practice? In a compliance-based system, you'd be looking at timeliness, you'd be looking at checklists, you'd be looking at the inputs into systems. Whereas in best practice, you'd be looking at what progress you were making, you will be looking at what outcomes are being developed. You'd be looking at how you're hearing from children, young people and their parents, that it won't just be based on, have we dotted this I and crossed this T on a plan? It would be much more about what's going on in the system as a whole. And my recommendation is to move to a greater best practice arrangement rather than being solely compliance based. What I would say is that if you haven't got anything, you need to start with compliance, but you move from compliance into a best practice type approach. I think we're going on to an exercise now. We are. So
I've popped in the chat, Chris, just very simple instructions for people to get here. If you just type in vote in Menti into your web bar, into Safari, Google, whatever, it'll take you to a login page. And in that login page, you'll just need to type the code that's on screen, but I'll also put the code in the chat. So if you type in vote in Menti and then type in the code, it's all anonymous as well. So when you share, it won't come from you, as it were. It will just be a comment or a word or whatever's asked for. But I'll come back to Chris now. Apologies, Chris.
That's all right. I'm now at the hands of the Mentimeter. So I think, could we just go to the question, Lydia, that we've asked?
Yeah, my IT skills are once again failing me. Let me just see if I can get this to work. Good.
Your IT skills are better than mine because you managed to set up something called Mentimeter.
Right, one moment.
1438. It should come up. I can talk people through it as you go. As you log in. Oh, well done, Charlotte.
Well done, Charlotte.
The question is, as you type in the code, the question will come up. And this first one is a word cloud. So enter a word. Let's share what best practice measures could be. And the cloud will generate on screen or on your device. Let's share what best practice measures could be. Yes, we can. And the code is 14389016. And to get there is vote in Menti, but we can see it coming through now.
Very clever. So I think if we could stop there, I don't know if it ever stops or whether it's just going to move around. But I think what I'd say is what's really interesting in this is if you look at because people haven't used the same words, if you'd all use the same phrases, it would be really big. But what I think would come out of this is child-centered voice of the child. There's lots of different elements of that. So my challenge to you is, how would you measure that? How would you show that that's going on? That can be through the audit process. It can be through questionnaires. It can be through ongoing discussions. But yeah, I think that the real aim of any plan should be that it's making a difference to young people. That is what they think the difference should be for them as well. So thanks for that. I'm going to move us on because we've got one more exercise to do in a minute. Now that we know how to do it, we'll be really efficient on the last one. So, so stakeholder engagement is really clear and key in developing quality assurance mechanisms. So I was really clear that you have to involve key stakeholders in quality assurance activity. You really should try and make sure that parents are involved in quality assurance. It gives them a sense that they are much more involved in the process of making things better. It gives them a sense of ownership over the system. You're seeking their views, you're helping them to understand the performance data that you've got, and you've got them undertaking audits of practice, so they feel that they're engaged in it more. As Sam said earlier, absolutely engage partners in our audits. We had the DISCO and the DCO were involved, and also we had regular public reporting of our performance, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that now and the challenges of that, and I'm going to ask you a question around that as well. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Lydia. So I think it's a real challenge about how you report quality assurance outcomes and findings, and whether you're doing that in a report to elected members, whether you're doing that in the media. It's a really difficult one when there's a national narrative about the quality of the system, and there's a public perception piece about the quality of the system. And also we all acknowledge that there are some fundamentally difficult things in the system that we're operating. So there are some real challenges. But actually, if you've got positive things going on, how do you highlight that? If there are things that aren't going well, how do you highlight that within this sort of quite challenging environment? So I think we're going on to another exercise. So it's, I think, the same code. So what are the risks of highlighting your positive and negative findings from your quality assurance activity? If there are some more, so it's the same code, it's just the next question on. If while you're doing that, I'll give an example. So we were very fortunate in Barnet that our quality assurance, our timeliness of EHCPs was really high. It was about 98%, and we did a press release. We did that because actually we wanted to commend our staff for their really hard work in doing that. It led to quite a big outcry from the community because, you know, the SEND system's broken, everything's broken. But it's quite a difficult thing to sort of tackle because, you know, if we want investment into services, actually we need to be showing that what's been invested is leading to better outcomes. So I think that there are some real challenges in this space. So it's going to be interesting to see what people say. And I think it is important about staff morale and saying, you know, actually you are doing a good job. It is about trying to build confidence in the system. But I do think you're right that there's a real risk of data being misinterpreted and what it means. I think that there is this real challenge of a alternative set of narratives. I think if you've got difficult data, there is a thing of, well, we told you so. If you look at those authorities that have had their Ofsted inspection, there are some real challenges in that space, especially if it's a negative outcome. But I think personally it's really important that you do talk about your data and what you're doing as a system, that you're open and transparent with the population that you're working with, even if it is a difficult thing to do. So thank you for the feedback on that. Some really interesting ideas in that space, and I think a lot of that is really useful to think about when you're looking at your QA processes. Lydia, I think there's one more slide, is there, or is it Q&A? I thought there was one more slide. So any questions?
You can freestyle if you want, Chris. If you over the top, if you expected one more slide, you're more than welcome.
No, I think I've probably talked enough.
One of the questions Chris talked about, it says in here, so learning loops including training auditors and then training advice givers. Is there anything else?
I think the learning loops, I would say that there are about how you do it is really important. So if you take an approach that is very compliance based, that is, we've just looked at one that sort of had words like inadequate and so on, and we all use those sorts of words, but actually it's about understanding the impact that has, and actually how do adults learn. They don't necessarily learn by you banging them over on the head. It is about appreciative inquiry. It's about learning through saying these are the things that have gone really well in this space, and these are the things that we could do better. So I think it is about training, but it's about training in a style, in a method that actually gets the best out of adults in terms of how they deal with learning and improvement.
Thanks, Chris. Another question around sharing QA outcomes or results. Is there a danger of sharing quantitative data without a narrative to go with it?
I think there is always a danger of share. The example that I gave you of 100% of assessments on time that are really poor quality. If you just said 100% of your assessments were on time, that wouldn't be helpful. And I sometimes think it's really difficult to just share process outcomes. I gave the process one as an example of where it was really difficult, when the level of the level of scrutiny and anger that came back from parents, even though they were doing audits and they knew that the quality of plans was good, the use of that indicator on its own was not helpful. But I think that there are also things about sharing results, making sure that you're looking at educational results through the lens of pupils with EHCP or on SEND support, making sure that data is shared so that people have an idea of how well your system's doing in terms of that group as well. So I know that we had really high results in that space. I think one of the things that I do feel that we have a duty to do is to say that for a number of children who have special educational needs and disabilities, the support that they get enables them to thrive. And I don't think we're always that great at saying that. We're not great at arguing, these are the things that are really good about the system. We're just told these are all the things that are wrong. And unless we start having a narrative of these are the good things about the system, these are the outcomes that children are achieving, these are the good bits of work that go on in our schools or in our other types of alternative provision, I think we're always on the back foot, and I'm much more of a, I'm optimistic that children have the opportunity to thrive, and we need to be talking about that, because daily professionals are working really hard to achieve really good outcomes. There's none of the SEN staff or the teaching staff or the social workers that I've worked with over the last number of years that my grey hair sort of shows have been people that have come into work to not try and make lives better for children and their families. So I'm very much about trying to present data and present QA in a really positive way, but also saying, look at this, we need improvement in this bit. So there is a tactic at times that you have to think about, that if you're not performing well, actually everybody knowing that you're not performing well means that there's a bit of an impetus for you to do something better as a leader.
Thanks, Chris. Excellent response. And then the last question before we move on to our final presentation this afternoon is, how did you establish agreed measures for best practice as opposed to sort of legislative requirements to ensure everyone then had a shared understanding of QA?
I think that's a really great question. I think, one of the biggest problems that we've got is that we've got a set of data that doesn't really tell you what you need to know. And so we did discussions with a whole range of people about what are things that could say that we're doing a good job. We worked in the improvement program with government about what data is helpful, what information's useful. I think for me, it was things like making sure that parents or children were involved in the process. Those are things that are quite difficult to, they're not legislated for, but if you can crack some of that, that's helpful. I'll be honest with you, a lot of it was nationally available data, because you can benchmark that and you can say, you're 150th in the country for this, but you're third in the country for that. That's always useful. But it was about talking to parents, talking to children and young people about what's important to them, what are the measures that matter to them, and focusing on those.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for delivering such a sort of a powerful and insightful session this afternoon. I know that's landed really, really well through the comments and the questions. Okay, I'm going to move on to our final session this afternoon, and I'm going to introduce you to Joanne Mills. Joanne has got more than 30 years in the sector of education and special educational needs and disabilities. She's been had lead roles in local authorities. She's working as a SEN consultant. She also in one local authority led a project that went on and won a UK-wide National MJ Council Award under the banner of digital transformation for the improvement in EHCP quality. So with that big introduction, Joanne, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice for you to join us today. And it's been really interesting listening to Sam and Chris and knowing what I'm going to say and seeing some of that theory and practice, hopefully you will see coming through. So with no further ado, I'll start. So I questioned what I was going to call this presentation, and you'll probably reflect on the title when I get to the end. So next slide, Lydia. So where does this particular journey start? If I go back to 2019, and we had our visit from Ofsted, and the first meeting in the room with everybody there, and the question came to me, so Joanne, what is the quality of your EHCPs like? And I sat and I had this dawning realization that although we'd done QA, and every time a plan was signed, it was QA'd, I didn't actually know. And so I went with my gut feeling and I said, variable. And Ofsted returned the favour by saying in our report, quality of EHCPs is variable. So maybe I should have used a different word. And we then used that. They then used that to make one of those 4 areas for our written statement. Next slide, Lydia. So when the inevitable dissecting of the report happened, the variability of the quality of EHCPs was seen by many of the leadership across the sector that were there with us as an easy one to crack. So they were saying things like, well, let's just do some training and make them better. This is going to be relatively easy. The SEN team can fix this. But then one question was, well, why are they variable? And that started the looking around, and there was lots of finger pointing. And by judging the end product, we talked a lot about it wasn't good enough just to judge the end product, and we needed to know why a plan wasn't meeting needs or what improvements needed to be made, but we needed to do that together. And that conversation dissecting that report came a really good time, and it came at a really good time as we were starting the momentum about just dismantling that SEN system and processes and everything to do with that, and rebuilding it from the bottom up. Next one. So what looked like the direction was going to happen was, with the SEN team, somebody, probably me, standing at the front and telling everybody what needed to happen. We needed the other picture of the meeting. We needed it to be everybody together, and we needed it to be true co-production. And that word co-production is thrown around willy-nilly all the time, but we really felt that co-production without calling it co-production at the beginning of this journey. Next one, Lydia. So we put 3 days of a multidisciplinary QA. We opened it up to everyone, to anyone from the sector. We actually had more than 400 participants over those 6 sessions. We took the decision to ask NDTI, so the National Development Team for Inclusion, to facilitate that for us. And I'm saying us as in the local area, not the local authority. We needed local authority officers to be part of those groups and to take a participatory role rather than leading it, as in the SEN team will sort it. We needed to really change the narrative from the SEN team control the quality of an EHCP to being, actually, if you don't get the ingredients right, you can't make a good EHCP. So we had those sessions, and it was a busy time. We had lots and lots of paper photocopied, and we had all the advice from various statutory assessments, previous statutory assessments, all redacted. So our admin team loved us at the time. And we sat in tables, multidisciplinary teams around that table. And what we did was NDTI asked us to write a section of an EHCP and do it together. Well, some of the practitioners, parents, schools that were involved in that had a dawning realization that actually the caseworkers were doing a marvelous job, and actually they were praising them for their efforts in turning some of that advice into a coherent EHCP. Fingers stopped pointing at the SEN team for the overall quality of EHCPs, and practitioners really started to talk about wanting to help and wanting to help the caseworkers be able to understand what was being written in their reports or their advice, but also helping them in the way that they were going to produce a more coherent EHCP, but also a more useful EHCP. And actually that was the catalyst that we needed. And EHCPs were being talked about in their component parts, not just the end document. The practitioners from health and social care started of their own free will rewriting the advice formats. They were being written by the services for the services to use, but not to make it easy for the services, to make it easier and better for the caseworkers to be able to write an EHCP at the end of it. Managers in health and social care started on a process of designing QA for advice with the lens of the receiver of the information, and we actually had movement and momentum. Next. From that 3-day, the coming together, we had to capture that momentum, but actually being honest about what was going on and how we were going to be able to do this, and how we as multidisciplinary teams across the local area, we couldn't do everything all at once. We couldn't do all of the EHCPs before a revisit. We couldn't. We had to own that, and we had to agree that with parents, and back to honesty, and on all the time we kept coming back. And it's fair to say that the chair of our parent carer forum was absolutely integral to all of this. She, and I'll refer to her lots of times as I go through the rest of this presentation, she was in it. She was explaining to parents, she was talking to families, we were talking to families, but it was all about that honesty. But at no point in the next few slides did we ever report on the overall EHCP. We took the decision that we would report on section by section. Next. So this picture might look familiar to all of you who have done any EHCP QAs in the past. Piles and piles of paper. And we had to make a decision about what actually did we want and how did we want to do it. And as luck would have it, we discovered Envision at that time. We were the second local authority that signed up. And we needed it. Everything that we were saying we needed at the time, being easy but effective, the same measure, able to measure small steps of progress, and with people that could affect change. Envision lent to that. So it kind of, I can't even remember how I found out about it. It might have been one of those emails that dropped into my inbox that you look and think, oh, this looks good. But then looking at it, how it was going to work for us, and it really was a collaborative effort then. We then started to look at who was going to QA, and actually preparing for this presentation, I started to list the people in and around the local area that actually was part of that QA framework. We set a framework and we altered the regularity of quality assurance to different people. So for example, I'll give you a quick run through the list. The chief exec used to quality assure EHCPs, as did the lead member for children's services, the DCS, the parent care forum chair, the lead for children's commissioning at the CCG as it was at the time, the DCO, the DISCO, service leads education, SEND, vulnerable learners, the head of the virtual school, the tribunals manager, the disabled children's team social worker, the team manager for SEND, our advisory teachers and specialist teachers, mentor SENCOs from our schools, children's commissioning lead, AD early help, AD social care, and the list could have gone on. I just couldn't remember. So quite a lot of people involved. So when it came to quarterly reporting, as we did to our to the exec team for the SEND improvement, when we started talking about inconsistencies in sections, some were improving, some weren't, some were laying stagnant, they really understand what it meant, and they had seen it, and they understood the intricacies and interdependencies of making those improvements. So partners were interested in supporting the caseworkers, but also making the process and outcome better. So, for example, improving the quality of the ingredients. Next slide, Lydia. I say that a bit of healthy competition never hurt anyone. It was really quite interesting when H1 and H2 were improving and G wasn't. And that competition between health and social care was great. So that really helped us in moving things forward. Every layer of every service was part of that QA process, and therefore knew what an EHCP was and what it wasn't. And then when it really helped with things like the inevitable complaints or questions from counsellors that come through. And the lead member for Children's could field some of those. She could talk about what she'd seen in EHCPs and the kind of improvements. So really spreading that love of an EHCP and what it is really did come through loud and really loud in the sector. Next. So in July 22, we had another visit from Ofsted, and we were ready for that question this time. So when he said, "And what is the quality of your EHCPs like, Joanne?" Well, where do you want me to start? So everybody could really talk knowledgeably about EHCPs. They could triangulate to their heart's content because everybody spoke with knowledge. They knew about the content, they knew how the improvements we'd made, they knew what services had involvement, the impact of children and on children and young people, and they could talk about what comes next and how we were working together to make them even better. And it was really important that when they went to talk to children and young people, they heard the same. Next slide. So some of the quotes that came back from the feedback were, and it was great to hear, the quality of the EHCPs is some of the best we've ever seen. We agreed with you on your evaluation of the quality of EHCP sampled. So when they gave us names of children and young people that they want to see their EHCPs, we told them what we thought, and we told them which sections of that EHCP we thought needed improving, and they agreed with us. And they said things like, you're not just marking your own homework as an SEN team, it's owned by the local area. Poppy, one of our young people at the college, was asked by the inspector what she thought of her EHCP, and she went, well, of course I like my EHCP, I designed it. But the strongest message that came through was that one at the end there, we did it. And the way that was said by the chair of our parent carer forum. So we did it, as in we all did it together. Next slide. And there we are, as Phil referenced there, that was when we won the award, but I've put a big circle around Emma, and Emma was the chair of our parent carer forum, and she was such an integral part of that improvement journey and really held everybody to account for what this was about, and it was about children and young people and making things better for them. That was a whistle-stop tour. Hope that was okay.
Yeah, Joanne, yeah, absolutely. Much more than okay. So look, firstly, thank you for that session. I thought that was a really candid, powerful, insightful account of a QA journey. And there was some brutal honesty in there, but some amazing learning points as well. So I thought that was fantastic. I loved some of the comments you made in there, like some of the organic things that happened, like the competition, to get that improvement for those sections and those services. I thought that was a fantastic comment, and I really like this idea of triangulation. Okay, on that note, I'm going to come to questions, Joanne.
Yep.
Ooh, hang on, I just lost it. This is an interesting one, and you'll see why in the survey feedback after when we're looking at future sessions and what webinars might be. The question is, do you think a generic or standard EHCP plan template would support the QA process, Joanne?
My personal opinion, no, I don't. I think that the format of it, I don't really think has anything to do with the quality. I think that unless you have generic advice templates that are able to be QA'd and looked at within the services who provide that advice, you're not going to get a quality EHCP. So it doesn't matter what template it's on. We changed the template at that time and completely rewrote everything, but actually it could have been written on the new template that DFE have brought out, and it wouldn't have made any difference unless the services had gone away and looked at quality assurance of their advice and how they were writing it for the audience that was going to use it.
Fabulous. Another comment that turns into a question, and I would agree this, was the choosing not to report on the overall quality, the overall grading. and choosing to focus on the reporting of individual section is really interesting as an approach. So the question that follows is, how was this received across the partnership, and what was the impact?
It was received really well. And it also meant that you could improve certain aspects of it really quickly, that the turnaround could from the quarterly reporting to, and I forgot to say, so the SEN team used to do their own internal quality assurance using the same criteria that we used on Envision. The plan writers the caseworkers would have it next to them while they were writing their plan. They would report to the sign off why a section wasn't good, and it mostly because the advice wasn't good. So we could report on things like that, but also how you put the training back into whichever service, or how you put the training back into the team. That could be done really quickly because it was section by section. You were basically eating the elephant a bite at a time, because I challenge anybody to improve the whole EHCP without looking in the minutiae of each section. It won't surprise you, section A was the one that improved the quickest, and that was all about how it was asked of the parent carers and the children and young people. So they were absolutely fabulous, and they actually designed how they were going to be asked those questions for section A. So, and section F was the next one that came online and really improved. And we quality assured, we did a baseline, we quality assured a whole year's worth of EHCPs as a local area, and then we ran a baseline from that and measured section by section from the time of the first Ofsted.
Thanks, Joanne. Just want to say there was another comment in there just to say, again, just agreed with how powerful your presentation was there in terms of that journey and that account. At this point, it brings me to sort of close the webinar, but before I do, there's a couple of things. There's a survey link in the chat, and we desperately want people to complete it, because it helped shape today's session. What was shared in last session really did shape today, particularly the topic and the theme. There are a number of themes and options so what you want to hear and what the appetite's for in this community, we will absolutely do. So please click on that link in this survey. While you're doing that, because we have finished early, we always give a little bit of time at the end for the survey completion, because we'll get those responses there. The webinar structure, we followed on from the feedback, the idea of having really powerful, innovative, inspirational speakers, but having short, snappy sessions that at the end of the day keep people sort of attending. It keeps people occupied, engaged, and it also, what we're trying to do is create that shared learning. I am very confident that there'll be things taken away from a collection of today's sessions that will go on and implement practice around the country now, just one, by you being here, and two, importantly, by having the three fantastic speakers that we've had today. A huge thank you to Sam, Chris and Joanne for presenting today and being part of our webinar series. We feel incredibly privileged to have you, and I'm very, very lucky to have such great speakers and partnerships where we can reach out to people like yourselves. So we will share, as I said at the start, the recording, the slides, and an overarching summary of the feedback from today. But with that, oh, sorry, before I go, there's a comment. I've put an additional question into the QA that's been missed. So let me book in. Just asking if there was any QA of EP work, Joanne, in relation to quality of section B, for example. So QA of educational psychology assessments, was there any part of that? Was that a service requirement? Was that something they did internally, Joanne, or was that something that was wider than the EP service themselves?
It was, I suppose it's difficult to comment on that because we had such a lack of EPs at that time, as lots of local authorities do. So it was more of a holistic look at how some of the agency advice was coming in, and also rewriting that advice. So no particular QA of the EP advice, but that's because of where we were with our EP service, more than it would have been done if we'd had a working EP service at that time.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. That question seamlessly brings me in, but it isn't about this today, so I will be quick. There is an additional module within Envision 360, our newest module, that looks at the quality of EP advice that's been written by EPs for EPs, working with 5 local authority principal educational psychologists. I won't say anything more than that. It's on our website. Today was very much about knowledge sharing. And last question, they keep coming in. I know this individual, so I'm definitely going to put this question in, otherwise he'll chastise me after. Daniel, thanks for the question. Just a quick logistical one. Did you have a dedicated individual to organise or coordinate your approach to QA?
No.
And I see Chris shaking his head as well. So that oh, well, I'll leave you guys going. Sorry, John.
I was going to say no, and I think it was really important that QA was seen as everybody's business rather than it being somebody else was doing too. So we always came back to that principle where we'd started off at the beginning saying, hang on a minute, we're all in this together. And I think as soon as you put somebody in charge of QA, that would have taken that collegiate approach away.
And then I'm going to let Tracy Jubb's comment be the final comment of the day, because I think this is probably wraps us up beautifully. It's just a big thank you. That was super useful and really appreciated the lived experiences of the presenters. So on that note, we're going to conclude. Please do complete the feedback. It's 5 minutes. It's also great for our presenters who take the time to get that little bit of feedback as well, and for us to shape future sessions. Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic evening, and yeah, hope it was really worthwhile. Take care all.